I am to be executed at dawn, fitting that my final night should be spent in this manner, quill in hand, confession spilling forth, truth after 10,000 years of lies. The weight of it crushes my enhanced physiology, each word more painful than the severance of limb from body. But speak I must. Hear me, whoever finds this testament. I am Atheon, once shield captain of the Adeptus Custodes, keeper of the Emperor's secrets. Now traitor, heretic, truth-bearer, the golden throne has always hummed, a constant, subsonic vibration that reverberates through the adamantium floors of the inner palace. We Custodes grew accustomed to it over centuries of service. The machine spirit, we told ourselves, the technological marvel sustaining our Lord's immortal form. How convenient, these little lies we whisper to ourselves, to make bearable what would otherwise break us. 10,000 years I have stood vigil. My golden armor has grown dull despite daily polishing rituals. My body, though enhanced beyond mortal limits by the Emperor's own design, has begun to fail. Age comes even to the Custodes, albeit slowly. First the eyes dim, then the mind follows. Many of my brothers choose the honorable path when their vigilance falters. They surrender their armor, take up the black cloak of the eyes of the Emperor, and venture into the wider Imperium to serve as silent watchers. I remained, stubborn perhaps, or simply afraid of what existed beyond these walls that had been my home for millennia. I should have chosen exile. 3 weeks ago, by imperial standard, I led the midnight inspection of the Sanctum Imperialis, a ritual performed without fail every 24 hours since the Emperor's interment. 4 custodian guards accompanied me, their guardian spears humming with potential energy. The massive doors to the throne room had swung open on actuators the size of titans. The incense was thick enough to chew. Servo skulls darted through the haze, their monotonous chanting adding to the chorus of tech priests who maintained the golden throne. The ritual was familiar, comforting in its unchanging nature. We processed toward the dais where the master of mankind sat enthroned, his withered corpse sustained by the ancient technologies of the Dark Age, his skull face forever frozen in silent agony. I had seen it countless times. Yet that night, something changed. A droplet. Just one. At first I believed it to be condensation, perhaps oil from one of the countless mechanisms that powered the life-sustaining marvel of the Golden Throne. But as it caught the light, I saw its true nature. Blood, not the dried, ancient kind that had long since turned to dust in the Emperor's desiccated veins. Fresh blood, with the unmistakable golden sheen that marks the vital fluid of our gene father. I said nothing to my brothers. Instead, I marked the location in my mind. Section 8, Junction 27B of the throne's vast undercarriage. After completing the inspection, I returned to my quarters in the custodian barracks. Sleep eluded me. The drop of blood occupied my thoughts like an infection. It should not have been possible. The Emperor had not bled in 10 millennia, not since the final battle with the arch-traitor Horus. The following night, I returned alone, using clearance codes that even among the Custodes few possessed. The Mechanicus adepts did not question my presence. None dare question a custodian in the heart of the Imperial Palace. I examined the undercarriage of the throne, the precise location where I had witnessed the impossible droplet. There was nothing. No trace. But the humming had changed, imperceptible to any but those who had heard it for thousands of years. The pitch was higher, irregular in its cadence. Like a heart struggling against arrhythmia, I placed my bare hand against the golden surface, feeling sacrilegious even as I did so. The metal was warm, no, hot, burning with an inner fire that the external cooling systems should have rendered impossible. And beneath my palm, I felt it, a pulse. In that moment, I should have reported to the Captain General. I should have raised the alarm, brought the full attention of the Custodes to bear on this anomaly. That was my sworn duty, my purpose for existing. Instead, curiosity overrode 10 millennia of conditioning. I followed the pulse. Down. Few know of the sublevels beneath the Golden Throne. the ancient access tunnels dating back to the Unification Wars, when the Emperor first established his rule over Terra. Fewer still possess the authority to enter them. As shield captain of the Hegemon Guard, I was among that select company. The tunnels were narrow, designed before the creation of the Custodes. I was forced to remove my armor, piece by golden piece, storing it in one of the maintenance alcoves that dotted the passage. Clad only in my robes, I felt naked, vulnerable in a way I had not experienced since my ascension to the Custodian Guard. The weight of the palace pressed down from above. Billions of tons of marble and adamantium, housing billions of souls, all unaware of my transgression. The air grew thin as I descended, the ancient ventilation systems struggling against entropy. The bleeding sigils began to appear at level 50, etched into the walls in languages I recognized from the Forbidden Archives. Eldar runes, Necrontyr glyphs, symbols from human civilizations long extinct, and others, twisting shapes that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. They had been carved with precision into the metal walls, each line perfect in its execution, and from them seeped that same golden fluid I had witnessed upon the throne. I am no psyker. The Emperor's modifications to our gene code made us resistant to the touch of the warp, an embodiment of his vision for humanity. Yet even I could feel the power emanating from those symbols, a pressure against my mind, like standing at the bottom of an ocean trench. Each heartbeat grew louder in my ears as I continued my descent. Level 66 presented me with a door, not the magnificent portals of the upper palace, wrought with scenes of imperial triumph. This was utilitarian, ancient, a slab of dark metal that absorbed light rather than reflected it. No handles adorned its surface, no visible means of entry, yet as I approached, it recognized me, or rather, it recognized what I was. Custodian genetic markers triggered mechanisms dormant for millennia. With a sigh of equalizing pressure, the door slid sideways into the wall. The chamber beyond defied comprehension. It stretched impossibly, far larger than the physical constraints of the mountain should have allowed. The ceiling soared hundreds of meters overhead, lost in shadow despite the ghostly illumination provided by floating spheres of cold fire. The floor was not metal or stone but a perfect mirror, reflecting everything above with flawless precision, and at the center stood an upright sarcophagus. Twice the height of a space marine, it was fashioned from the same light-drinking material as the door. No adornment marred its perfect surface save for a single symbol at its heart, the same symbol that adorns the Emperor's own standard, the lightning bolt and wings. But here, the wings were not those of the Imperial Aquila. They were stretched membranes, like those of Terran bats, or demons. I approached slowly, each step echoing in the vast chamber. The air tasted of ozone and copper. The hair on my arms stood on end. Power, raw and untamed. Not the sterile energy of the throne's mechanics, but something alive, hungry. The sarcophagus had no visible seam or hinge. Yet as I stood before it, a line of golden light appeared down its center. The crack widened, revealing darkness within. No, not darkness. Something that consumed light, a void that throbbed with negative radiance. From that crack emerged a voice, not sound as humans understand it, but direct communion with my mind, a voice I had heard only in dreams and ancient recordings. His voice, Atheon, it said, my name in his mouth, a violation and a benediction. I fell to my knees. Tears streamed unbidden down my face. 10,000 years of faith and duty collapsed under the weight of that voice. The Emperor, alive, conscious, speaking, rise, the voice commanded, and I obeyed, as I had been created to do. The crack widened further. Golden light spilled forth, blinding in its intensity. I shielded my eyes with my arm, squinting against the radiance. As my vision adjusted, I beheld him, not the withered corpse upon the golden throne, not the perfect godlike figure from the propaganda murals. What stood before me was both more and less than those images. One half of the figure shone with the familiar radiance of the master of mankind, perfect in proportion, powerful beyond mortal comprehension. The face I had sworn to serve, rendered in flawless detail, but the other half, twisted sinew and exposed muscle, bone that shifted and flowed like quicksilver, an eye that was not an eye but a window into some impossible dimension where colors had texture and sounds had taste. The flesh pulsed with internal light that shifted through spectrums no human was meant to perceive. Half god, half abomination, the Emperor's true form. "You see me as I am," the figure said, its voice now audible, resonating from both the perfect mouth and the writhing mass of its other half. The first of my sons to look upon this truth in 10 millennia. I wanted to avert my gaze. Every instinct screamed to look away, to reject what stood before me. But I could not. The same compulsion that had drawn me down to this forbidden place now held me transfixed. "My lord," I managed to whisper, my voice thin and reedy in the charged atmosphere. "How is this possible? You sit upon the throne above. The Mechanicus tends to your mortal remains. The Astronomicon burns with your psychic might." The figure's perfect half smiled, a gesture so human it seemed obscene on that divided countenance. "The corpse above is but a shell," it said, "a focus for the faith of humanity, a beacon through which I channel my will, but not my true self. Never that." It stepped forward, out of the sarcophagus entirely. Golden blood dripped from the seam between its halves, sizzling where it struck the mirrored floor. "Since the day my son struck me down, I have existed in this state," the figure continued, "balanced between realms, neither fully of the materium nor fully of the immaterium, a god in becoming, a being of transition." With each word, I felt my sanity fraying. The foundations of my existence, the purpose to which I had dedicated 10 millennia of service, crumbling beneath me. The Imperium worshipped the Emperor as a god. But what god was this? What divinity could manifest as this divided horror? "The throne does not sustain me," the figure said, answering my unspoken question. "I sustain the throne. My will alone holds back the tides of the warp from consuming terror. My divided essence maintains the Astronomicon that guides humanity through the stars, but at a cost, Atheon, always at a cost." It gestured to its corrupted half, the twisted mass of semi-demonic flesh. "This is the price of godhood. To rule in the materium, I must exist partially in the immaterium. To guide humanity, I must understand what they face. To fight the ruinous powers, I must become something of what they are." I found my voice again, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. "Then the imperial truth was a lie. There are gods?" The figure's perfect half frowned, while its corrupted half twisted in what might have been laughter. "The truth was necessary," it said. "Had humanity embraced religion during our expansion, they would have fed the warp entities, strengthened them beyond containment. The truth was a vaccine against the disease of faith. But vaccines contain a weakened form of the disease itself." It stepped closer. I could feel the heat radiating from its perfect half, the cold emptiness emanating from its corrupted half. Two opposed forces balanced in one impossible being. "And now," it continued, "the Imperium worships me as a god. Their faith strengthens me, sustains this divided existence. The great irony of my crusade against religion, I became the very thing I sought to eliminate." Questions burned in my mind, too numerous and too terrible to articulate, but one rose above the others, demanding voice. "Why show this to me?" I asked. "Why now, after 10,000 years?" The figure's perfect half smiled again. Its corrupted half pulsed with shifting colors that hurt to perceive. "Because the balance is failing, Atheon. The golden blood seeps through, the barriers weaken. Soon, what sits upon the throne above and what stands before you now must reunite. And when that happens, Terra will know the truth that you now bear." "And what is that truth, my lord?" I asked, though I feared the answer more than I had ever feared death. Both halves spoke in unison then, the perfect voice and the gibbering chorus combining in terrible harmony, that to save humanity, I had to become its greatest enemy, that the line between God and Daemon is thinner than the edge of a blade, that faith sustains not because it is true, but because the believing make it so. The figure raised its hands, one perfect and golden, one twisted and impossible. The warp is the mirror of humanity's soul, Atheon, and I have gazed into that mirror for longer than any being should. What stares back is neither the god your Imperium worships, nor the secular leader I once pretended to be. It is something new, something becoming. My legs gave way beneath me. I collapsed to the mirrored floor, my reflection showing a face I barely recognized. Aged beyond its years, eyes wide with comprehension no human mind was meant to hold. What would you have me do with this knowledge? I asked, my voice breaking. How am I to serve knowing what I know? The figure regarded me with both its perfect eye and its swirling void of non-existence. That, it said, is your choice to make. The first true choice any custodian has been granted since your creation. You may return to the surface and speak what you have witnessed. You may end your existence here, taking this truth to oblivion. Or you may join me in the great becoming. It extended both hands toward me. An offer, a test, a damnation. Consider carefully, my son. For whichever path you choose, the Imperium as you know it cannot survive what comes next. With those words, the figure stepped back into the sarcophagus. The crack of golden light narrowed, then sealed entirely, leaving me alone in the impossible chamber with a choice no mortal was equipped to make. I remained there for hours, perhaps days. Time held little meaning in that place beyond reality's firm grasp. When at last I rose, my decision was made. I would return to the surface. Not to raise alarm, not to spread heresy, but to record what I had witnessed, to leave testament for whoever might follow after the coming change. The ascent felt longer than the descent, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached my discarded armor, I was an old man in spirit if not in flesh. I donned the golden plate mechanically, each piece a burden rather than a privilege. The weight of duty had never felt so crushing. Upon returning to the upper levels, I discovered that only a single night had passed in the world above. My absence had gone unnoticed. The routines of the palace continued uninterrupted. Prayers were intoned, incense burned. The emperor was worshipped as the god thing he had become. And beneath it all, beneath the faith and ritual and desperate hope, the truth pulsed like a corrupted heart. For 3 weeks I maintained my duties. I led inspections. I stood vigil. I played the role that had been mine for 10 millennia. All while the knowledge ate at me from within. The perfect face and the twisted horror. The divided emperor. The god that was not a god but something stranger still. Today, I broke. During the evening inspection, as we stood before the withered corpse upon the golden throne, I saw it, the corruption spreading. A patch of the emperor's exposed skin, just visible beneath the life support apparatus, shifting like quicksilver, pulsing with internal light. The transformation had begun. I spoke then, told my brothers what I had seen below. What awaited humanity when the balance finally failed. They stared at me with faces carved from stone, unmoved, unbelieving. Then the guardian prefect gave the order. I was seized, my weapons stripped from me, charged with heresy of the highest order. The Captain General himself pronounced my sentence, death. So here I sit in this cell, smaller than the sarcophagus that housed the Emperor's true form, quill in hand. Confession flowing onto parchment that will likely burn before any eyes, but my executioners can read it. Yet I write nonetheless. I bear witness, I speak truth, though truth be damned. The Emperor is not what humanity believes. Neither corpse nor god nor secular leader returned. He is becoming something else, something that straddles realities. And when his transformation completes, the Imperium will face its final test. Faith against truth, hope against reality. The god thing that was once the master of mankind against the horror of his own creation. Dawn approaches. I hear the tread of my brothers outside my cell. They come for me, golden in their righteousness, blind in their faith. I do not blame them. Once I was as they are, but I have seen the Emperor's true face, both faces, and I cannot unsee them. I am Atheon, once shield captain of the Adeptus Custodes, keeper of the Emperor's secrets, now traitor, heretic, truth-bearer, and these are my final words. The golden throne bleeds, the god thing stirs, the Imperium ends. Hours pass differently in the cells beneath the Imperial Palace. Perhaps it has been days since I wrote those words, perhaps mere minutes. My executioners have not come. The dawn I anticipated remains held at bay. Instead, my cell door opened to reveal the Captain General himself, Trajan Valoris, his magnificent armor gleaming in the dim light, his guardian spear held not as a weapon but as a staff of office. "Rise, Shield Captain Atheon," he said, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. "Your execution has been postponed." I stood on legs weakened by confinement and revelation. Has my heresy been reconsidered then? Valoris remained impassive, his face as much a mask as his ceremonial helm. "The tribune prefects have convened. Your words have raised questions. You will answer them before your sentence is carried out. So, not pardoned, merely delayed. The Custodes value truth, even when that truth may prove uncomfortable. I should have expected nothing less." Valoris escorted me personally through corridors I had walked for millennia, now seeing them with new eyes. The grandeur of the Imperial Palace, built to elevate humanity to its pinnacle, now seemed hollow, pretension constructed around a lie. The golden eagles and heroic statuary, the soaring arches and immortalized victories, all of it propaganda for a regime founded on carefully cultivated ignorance. We passed squads of custodian guard who turned their eyes from me, not out of shame or disgust, but from the superstitious fear that heresy might be contagious through mere observation. Only Valoris seemed immune to such concerns. But then, he had stood closest to the Emperor for centuries. Perhaps he already suspected what I now knew. The chamber of Tribunal Exactus was a perfect circle cut from a single massive block of Terran marble, dating back to the Unification Wars. The 12 tribune prefects sat in thrones arranged in a smaller circle at the center. No grand amphitheater, no audience. Custodian justice is a private affair. Our shame is our own. I stood before them unarmored, wearing only a simple robe. They remained encased in their full panoply of war, as if they expected violence from one unarmed man. Or perhaps they feared whatever truths I might speak would require physical defense. Shield Captain Atheon began the most senior tribune, his voice amplified by his helm's vox. "You stand accused of heresy against the Emperor of mankind. You claim to have witnessed a manifestation of our Lord in the sub-levels of the palace. You claim this manifestation revealed truths that contradict 10,000 years of imperial doctrine. Speak now, recount in full what you allege to have seen." And so I did. Every detail, every word exchanged between myself and the divided Emperor. I held nothing back. If my death was assured, then truth would be my final act of service. The tribunes listened in silence, unmoving, unreadable behind their ornate helms. When I finished, the chamber remained silent for long minutes. Then, the senior tribune spoke again. "You are not the first, Shield Captain." 5 words that shattered what remained of my understanding. Not the first. Not the only one to have witnessed the Emperor's dual nature. I felt my legs weaken beneath me. "Explain," I managed to say. The tribune's helm turned slightly toward Valoris, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Permission granted. Once each millennium, since the Emperor's interment upon the Golden Throne, a custodian has been drawn to the sub-levels, always one of high rank, always one who has served with perfect loyalty, always one who has begun to show the first signs of age, and always they return changed." I found my voice again. The others, what became of them? Some chose silence, returning to their duties until age claimed them entirely. Others chose exile, joining the ranks of the eyes of the Emperor and vanishing into the wider Imperium. A few chose death, falling upon their own guardian spears rather than live with what they had learned. Another, Tribune leaned forward, and some, Shield Captain Atheon, chose to speak, as you have done. Those were given a final duty. I understood then. The postponement of my execution was not mercy, it was reassignment. Valoris stepped forward, his guardian spear striking the marble floor with a sound like judgment. The Emperor's nature is beyond human comprehension. What you witnessed was but one facet of his divinity, filtered through the limitations of your perception. The Imperium endures because faith endures. Not because that faith is misplaced, but because it is necessary. Then you know, I said, looking from one tribune to another. All of you know what lies beneath, what the Emperor has become, and still you serve. We serve precisely because we know, said the senior tribune. The alternatives are worse than the burden of this truth. The Emperor, divided though his form may be, remains humanity's only shield against the darkness. Would you have us cast aside that shield because its nature disturbs you? Put so plainly, the answer was obvious. Even knowing what I knew, the Imperium of Man remained the only bulwark against extinction, against the predations of Xenos and the corruptions of chaos. If the price of that protection was worshipping a being caught between godhood and damnation, was that price not worth paying? What would you have me do? I asked, echoing the question I had posed to the Emperor's divided form. Valoris approached, holding out a data slate. You will take ship to Titan, where you will join a conclave of those who share your knowledge. There, you will add your account to the Codex Obscuros, the hidden record of the Emperor's true nature. Then, you will be given your final assignment. I took the slate, its weight insignificant compared to the burden of knowledge I already carried. And what assignment is that? You will become the bearer of truth, said the senior tribune. When the time comes, when the Emperor's transformation reaches its culmination, humanity must be prepared, not with lies, not with blind faith, but with understanding. You will carry the seeds of that understanding to selected individuals throughout the Imperium. Inquisitors, chapter masters, lord generals, those whose faith must be tempered with wisdom if they are to lead humanity through what comes next. I almost laughed. From condemned heretic to sanctioned missionary in the span of an hour, the irony was not lost on me. And if I refuse? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Then your original sentence stands, said Valoris simply. The choice is yours. But consider this, Shield Captain. If what you witnessed is true, if the Emperor is indeed transforming into something beyond our comprehension, then humanity will need guides who have glimpsed that truth and survived its revelation. Who better than one who has served him for 10 millennia? I looked down at the data slate in my hands. It displayed a single image, a ship, sleek and small, built for stealth rather than war. The whisper of truth, according to the designation beneath. My chariot, should I accept this mission? How many before me have chosen this path? I asked. 9, replied the senior tribune. 9 in 10,000 years. The 10th carries special significance in imperial numerology, the complete cycle, the fulfillment of prophecy. Prophecy. Another word I would have dismissed as superstition mere weeks ago. Now, knowing what I knew about the Emperor's nature, about the thinness of the veil between reality and the warp, I could no longer be so certain. I will need time to consider, I said, though in truth my decision was already made. Death would be simpler, cleaner. But if the Imperium faced transformation as profound as that occurring within the Emperor himself, then those who served it would need preparation. You have until moonrise, said Valoris. The whisper of truth departs for Titan with or without you aboard. Make your peace with your decision, Shield Captain. For whichever path you choose, there is no returning to what you were before. No returning, no undoing of knowledge. No erasure of the memory of that divided form, half radiance and half horror. The Emperor's true nature, revealed to one deemed worthy to bear it. or perhaps simply unfortunate enough to stumble upon it at the appointed time, I was escorted not back to my cell but to modest quarters near the custodian barracks. Not quite free, not quite prisoner, a fitting limbo for one who had witnessed the liminal state of the master of mankind. I sat upon the simple cot, data slate in hand, and began to read the accounts of those who had gone before me. 9 custodians across 10 millennia. 9 who had been drawn down to the sub-levels. 9 who had witnessed the Emperor's divided form. 9 who had chosen to bear that truth rather than escape it through death or denial. Their accounts varied in detail but aligned in substance. The Emperor, neither fully material nor fully immaterial. The balance failing, millennium by millennium. The transformation progressing, inexorable as entropy itself. And through it all, a pattern emerged. Each visitation occurred at a moment of crisis for the Imperium. The age of apostasy. The war of the beast. The Nova Terra Interregnum. Moments when humanity's future hung in the balance. Moments when truth became as vital as faith. I read until my eyes grew heavy. Sleep claimed me still clutching the data slate, my dreams filled with that divided face. The perfect golden countenance and the shifting horror, god and monster, emperor and other. I awoke to the sound of the door opening, Valoris again, this time without his guardian spear. A sign of trust, or perhaps simply confidence that an unarmed custodian in modest quarters presented no threat to the Captain General. "Moonrise approaches, shield captain," he said without preamble. "Have you made your decision?" I rose, still holding the data slate. These others, these bearers of truth, they seeded understanding throughout the Imperium? Valoris nodded. Carefully, selectively. The common citizen has no need for such knowledge. Their faith sustains them through lives of hardship and sacrifice. But those who lead, those who must make decisions that affect billions, they require more than faith. They require context. And now it falls to me to provide that context, I said, more statement than question. If you choose it, replied Valoris, death remains an option. Many would consider it more merciful. I set down the data slate. I have served the Emperor for 10,000 years, Captain General. I will not abandon that service now, simply because his nature proves more complex than imperial propaganda would have us believe. For the first time since my arrest, I saw something like approval in Valoris's stance. Then gather what personal effects you wish to bring. The whisper of truth awaits, and shield captain, Atheon. From this moment forward, you are no longer custodian, you are truth-bearer. The burden you carry excludes you from our brotherhood, even as it marks you as essential to our purpose. Exile then, not unexpected. The custodian guard could not harbor one who spoke openly of the Emperor's dual nature. Not among their ranks. I was to become something else, something apart. I understand, I said, though the severance cut deeper than I had anticipated. 10 millennia of brotherhood, ended by a single night's revelation. One final matter, said Valoris, producing a small adamantium case from a pouch at his belt. This belongs to you. I opened the case. Inside lay a small golden pin, fashioned in the shape of the imperial aquila. But unlike the standard depiction, one of the eagle's heads was twisted, its beak elongated into something that resembled a daemon's maw more than a bird of prey. The symbol of the truth-bearer, explained Valoris. Wear it concealed. Those who need to recognize you will know where to look. I took the pin, its weight negligible yet somehow immense. And my armor? My weapons? Remain here, said Valoris. Where you go, such obvious symbols of imperial authority would draw unwanted attention. You will be provided with more suitable attire, and weapons more discreet than a guardian spear, yet no less lethal. I nodded, accepting this final severance from my former life. In truth, I had ceased being a true custodian the moment I had descended to the sub-levels. This merely formalized what was already reality. Then I am ready, I said, pinning the twisted aquila to the inside of my robe, close to my heart. A fitting place for such a burden. Valoris led me through seldom-used corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares of the palace where my passage might be noted. We emerged onto a small landing platform, one of thousands that dotted the massive complex. The Whisper of Truth waited, its hull a matte black that absorbed light rather than reflected it. No imperial iconography marred its surface, no declarations of allegiance or purpose, a shadow given form. A robed figure stood at the boarding ramp, face concealed by a deep hood. As we approached, the figure looked up, revealing features I recognized despite the centuries that had passed since I had seen them last. "Tribune Diocletian," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "You were reported lost during the Third Black Crusade." The ancient custodian's face was lined with age far beyond what even our kind typically showed. His eyes, however, remained sharp as the day he had stood at the Emperor's side during the War of the Beast. "I was lost, Shield Captain Atheon," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "Lost to the Brotherhood of the Custodes, but found to a greater purpose, as you are now found." I looked to Valoris, whose expression revealed nothing. "You knew," I accused. "I suspected," corrected the Captain General. "Each bearer of truth selects their successor, guiding them toward the revelation through subtle means. Diocletian has watched your career for centuries, marking you as one whose mind might withstand the truth without breaking." Diocletian gestured toward the ship's interior. "We have much to discuss, Atheon. The conclave on Titan awaits, and time grows short. The Emperor's transformation accelerates. What took centuries now occurs in decades. Soon, it will be measured in years, then months." The implications struck me like a thunderbolt. "How long?" I asked. "Until completion? Perhaps a century. No more. After 10 millennia of balance, the scales tip increasingly toward transformation. What you witnessed in the sublevels is manifesting more frequently upon the throne itself. The Mechanicus reports anomalies they cannot explain. The Sisters of Silence speak of disturbances in the null field. The signs multiply." Valoris placed a hand upon my shoulder, a gesture of brotherhood offered for the last time. "Go with purpose, Truth-bearer. Prepare the way. For in the Emperor's transformation lies either humanity's salvation or its extinction. And none, not even those of us who have glimpsed his dual nature, can predict which it shall be." I clasped his forearm in the warrior's grip, one final connection to the brotherhood I had served for millennia. "Guard the throne, Captain General. Whatever sits upon it, whatever it is becoming, it remains our only shield against the darkness." "Until the stars themselves grow cold," he confirmed, completing the ancient custodian oath. With that, I turned and followed Diocletian into the Whisper of Truth. The boarding ramp closed behind us, sealing with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like finality. Through a viewport, I watched Valoris grow smaller as the ship lifted from the platform and angled toward the night sky. Terra, the throne world. My home for 10,000 years, now falling away beneath me. I felt its loss like physical pain, a severing more profound than the removal of limb or an organ. Yet mixed with that pain was something unexpected, relief. The burden of pretense lifted, the exhaustion of maintaining faith in a lie finally set aside. Diocletian led me to the ship's modest command center, where 3 other robed figures waited. Their faces bore the unmistakable signs of advanced age, the slow deterioration that comes to even the genetically perfected bodies of the Custodes. Each wore the same unadorned robes, and upon their breasts, visible only when they moved in certain ways, glinted the twisted aquila of the truth-bearers. "Brothers," Diocletian addressed them, "I present Atheon, once shield captain of the Hegemon Guard, now the 10th bearer." They regarded me with eyes that had seen too much, gauging, assessing, determining whether I was truly ready for the burden I had accepted. "He has seen the Emperor's dual nature?" asked one, his accent marking him as ancient even by custodian standards. The archaic Terran cadence of the Unification Wars still colored his speech. "He has," confirmed Diocletian. And like the 9 before him, he has chosen truth over comforting lies. The Ancient One nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then we are complete. The cycle fulfills itself. Cycle. There was that word again. Explain, I demanded, my patience for cryptic pronouncements wearing thin after all I had endured. Diocletian gestured for me to sit at the circular table that dominated the command center. The other truth-bearers joined us, forming a ring of weathered faces and ancient wisdom. The Emperor's foresight did not end with his interment upon the golden throne, began Diocletian. Even divided between materium and immaterium, he planned for what would follow. The creation of the truth-bearers was his design, not ours. A contingency against the day when faith alone would no longer sustain the Imperium. One of the others, a woman whose face bore the marks of augmetic reconstruction around her eyes, continued, "Every 1,000 years, one custodian is drawn to witness the Emperor's true form, one who has the mental fortitude to comprehend without breaking, one who can carry the truth to selected individuals throughout the Imperium. And I am the 10th, I said, understanding dawning. But why is that significant? Why does the cycle fulfill itself with me?" The Ancient One leaned forward, his withered hands clasped before him. Because the Emperor prophesied that the 10th witnessing would mark the beginning of his transformation's final phase. The great change approaches, Atheon. What has been building for 10 millennia comes to fruition in our lifetime. I felt cold despite the ship's regulated temperature. And what exactly is this great change? What does the Emperor become when his transformation completes? The 4 truth-bearers exchanged glances, a silent communication born of shared burden. "We do not know with certainty," admitted Diocletian. "Each of us has witnessed the Emperor's dual nature, but none has received clear revelation of the endpoint. We have theories, extrapolations based on patterns observed over millennia, but the truth is, the transformation may be unique in the galaxy's history. A human becoming divine while simultaneously embracing the immaterium without succumbing to its corruptions." "The Primarchs were his first attempts," said the woman. "Beings of both realms, material and immaterial. But they proved unstable, half turned to chaos, the other half proved insufficient for his ultimate purpose." "Which was?" I asked. "Transcendence," said Diocletian simply. "The Emperor sought what no human had achieved before, godhood without corruption. Warp ascension, while maintaining human purpose and perspective. The ultimate evolution of the human species, embodied in its creator." I recalled the divided form I had witnessed, half radiant perfection, half writhing horror. "That does not look like transcendence to me, Tribune. It looks like corruption wearing the mask of divinity." The Ancient One shook his head. "You saw but one moment in a process spanning millennia. The division you witnessed is not the end state but the transitional phase. The chrysalis, not the butterfly. And when this butterfly emerges," I pressed, "what becomes of the Imperium? Of humanity?" "That," said Diocletian gravely, "depends largely on how prepared they are for the revelation, which is why we exist, Atheon. Not merely to witness, but to prepare. To select those who must know the truth before it manifests fully. To cultivate understanding that will preserve humanity when faith in the old Emperor can no longer sustain them." The ship shuddered slightly as it entered the warp, reality giving way to the swirling madness of the immaterium. A fitting parallel to my own transition, from the solid certainties of custodian duty to the fluid ambiguities of truth-bearer. "Tell me of Titan," I said, changing tack. "Why gather there?" "The Grey Knights," answered the woman. "Of all the Emperor's servants, they alone were created with full knowledge of chaos and its corruptions. Their fortress monastery contains archives dating back to the Horus Heresy, records of the Emperor's preparations for what would follow his interment upon the throne. They know of the Emperor's dual nature." I asked, surprised that such knowledge extended beyond the truth-bearers. "Their Supreme Grand Master knows," clarified Diocletian. "Each generation, one truth-bearer travels to Titan to update the Codex Obscuros and brief the new Supreme Grand Master. The Grey Knights are our allies in this great work, though they view it through the lens of their own purpose, the fight against chaos. And do they see the Emperor's transformation as salvation or damnation? I asked. The 4 truth-bearers exchanged glances again. They reserve judgment, said the Ancient One, as should you, until you have reviewed all the evidence collected over 10 millennia. The pattern becomes clearer when viewed across such timescales. I nodded, accepting the wisdom in his words. I had witnessed but a single moment in the Emperor's transformation. These truth-bearers had collectively observed its progression over thousands of years. After Titan, said Diocletian, returning to practicalities, you will begin your true work, the selection and preparation of individuals throughout the Imperium, inquisitors of suitable temperament, chapter masters whose loyalty transcends blind faith, imperial officials whose influence shapes policy, even selected members of the Adeptus Mechanicus whose technological expertise may prove vital during the transition. How do I identify such individuals? I asked. The woman smiled, the expression strange on a face so weathered by age. The same way Diocletian identified you, Atheon. You observe, you test, you present small truths and gauge reactions. Those who respond with thoughtful consideration rather than reflexive denial or blind acceptance, those are the candidates worthy of further attention. And once identified, you reveal only what they need to know when they need to know it, said Diocletian. Some will require merely a nudge toward questioning received dogma. Others will be ready for more direct revelation. The most important will be brought to witness the evidence firsthand, though none save custodians have been permitted to see the Emperor's dual form directly. The ship's internal illumination dimmed, indicating the night cycle. The conversation paused naturally, the 5 of us sitting in contemplative silence. After so much revelation, I welcomed the quiet, time to process, to begin integrating what I had learned with what I had witnessed personally. Rest, suggested Diocletian, rising from the table. We have several days in the warp before reaching Titan. Time enough for you to read the complete chronicles of the truth-bearers and form your own conclusions. The others rose as well, moving toward what I presumed were personal quarters off the main command center. I remained seated, staring at the twisted Aquila pin I had removed from my robe. One last question, Tribune, I said as Diocletian made to leave. Do you believe the Emperor remains human in any meaningful sense? Or has he truly become the god that the ecclesiarchy proclaims, merely one with a more complex nature than they comprehend? Diocletian paused in the doorway, his aged face thoughtful. I believe, Atheon, that those categories, human and god, no longer apply to what the Emperor is becoming. He creates his own category, unique in the universe. Whether that uniqueness proves humanity's salvation or its undoing remains to be seen, and may, in fact, depend on the actions of those who know the truth. With that, he left me alone with my thoughts and the weight of my new purpose. The 10th bearer, the completion of the cycle, the herald of the great change. I slept little that night cycle, my mind too full of implications and possibilities. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my dreams were filled with that divided face, the perfect golden countenance and the shifting horror. But now, in dreams, I saw something more, the division blurring, the two halves merging into something new, something neither fully material nor fully immaterial, something becoming. I awoke with a gasp, the dream images fading but the impression lingering, a sense of witnessing not corruption but transformation, not fall but ascension. Was this insight or wishful thinking, truth or self-deception? After 10 millennia of faithful service, could I truly be objective about what the Emperor had become? The journey to Titan passed in study and contemplation. I read the collected accounts of the previous 9 truth-bearers, noting the progression of the Emperor's transformation across the millennia. The earliest accounts described a being more recognizably human in its divided state, the golden half more dominant, the immaterial half less defined. As the centuries passed, the balance shifted subtly. The immaterial aspects grew more pronounced, more structured, less chaotic mutation and more deliberate adaptation. I discussed these observations with my fellow truth-bearers, particularly Diocletian, whose witnessing had occurred over 3,000 years ago. His account aligned with the pattern. The emperor he described had been less divided, less dramatically split between material and immaterial aspects. The progression was clear. What had begun as minor infiltration of immaterial elements into the emperor's essence had developed into the fully divided being I had witnessed. And the endpoint? I asked Diocletian as we stood on the observation deck, watching the swirling madness of the warp through void shields and sanctified viewing ports. If the pattern continues, does the immaterial eventually consume the material entirely? Perhaps, he admitted. Or perhaps the material and immaterial achieve a new synthesis, neither one nor the other, but something that transcends both. The ancient Eldar achieved a form of godhood before their fall. The Chaos powers represent another path to divinity, though one corrupted by the worst aspects of sentient desire. The Emperor may be forging a third path, one uniquely human in its conception. But at what cost? I wondered aloud. The Imperium is built on the belief in a perfect, unchanging Emperor. A secular leader turned divine through humanity's need for faith, perhaps, but recognizably human in origin and purpose. What becomes of that Imperium when faith confronts the reality of what sits upon the golden throne? Diocletian's weathered face remained impassive. That, Atheon, is the question that has occupied the truth-bearers for 10,000 years, and why our work grows increasingly vital as the transformation accelerates. The Imperium must evolve alongside its master, or it will shatter when the chrysalis finally opens. On the 7th day, we emerged from the warp into the Saturn system. Titan loomed before us, its atmosphere a toxic soup shrouding the fortress monastery of the Grey Knights. No orbital defenses challenged our approach. The whisper of truth was expected, its unique signature recognized by systems put in place millennia ago for precisely this purpose. We landed in a secluded hangar, far from the main fortress complex. No honor guard greeted us, no formal reception. The Grey Knights valued secrecy above ceremony. A single Terminator-armored figure awaited us, the weight of his presence marking him as no ordinary battle brother. "Supreme Grandmaster Drygo," said Diocletian, bowing his head slightly in acknowledgement. "We bring the 10th bearer, as was foretold." The massive figure regarded me with eyes that had witnessed the raw stuff of chaos and remained uncorrupted. "Then the time approaches," he said, his voice resonating within his helm. "The archives have been prepared. Follow me." We processed through corridors carved from Titan's bedrock, warded with sigils of banishment and protection. Unlike the ostentatious grandeur of the imperial palace, the fortress monastery of the Grey Knights was austere to the point of asceticism. Form followed function with brutal efficiency. These were warriors who had no need for reminders of their purpose or their loyalty. Both were encoded into their very genes. The Librarium Obscuros lay deep within the fortress, behind doors of adamantium etched with wards against intrusion both physical and psychic. Drygo pressed his gauntleted hand against a recognition panel, and the massive doors swung inward with surprising silence. The chamber beyond defied expectation. Where I had anticipated stacks of tomes and data slates, instead there stood a single pedestal at the center of a circular room. Upon the pedestal rested a device I recognized from ancient records, a Horus Heresy-era Scrya Cogitator designed to interface directly with the user's mind, bypassing physical interaction entirely. "The Codex Obscuros," explained Drygo, gesturing toward the device. "Not a text, but an experience. The collected witnessings of all truth-bearers, preserved in their full sensory and emotional content. You will add your account to theirs, Atheon, and in doing so, you will experience theirs in return." I approached the pedestal with appropriate caution. Direct mind interface technology had largely been abandoned after the heresy, deemed too vulnerable to warp corruption. That the Grey Knights maintained such a device spoke to both their confidence in their psychic defenses and the importance they placed on preserving the truth-bearers' accounts in their original, unfiltered form. "Is it safe?" I asked, not out of fear for myself but concern for the integrity of what my mind would contact. "As safe as any contact with truth can be," replied Drygo cryptically. "It will change you, bearer, as it has changed all who came before you, but better to be changed by truth than comforted by lies." I looked to Diocletian, who nodded encouragement. The other truth-bearers remained by the entrance, observers to this ritual of succession. Taking a deep breath, I placed my hands on the smooth surface of the scryer cogitator. The device activated instantly, interfacing with my mind through means I could neither perceive nor resist. The chamber vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of memory and sensation. I was no longer myself alone, but a composite being, experiencing 9 previous witnessings simultaneously. I walked down ancient corridors with Constantin Voldor, the first truth-bearer, mere centuries after the Emperor's interment. I felt his shock at finding not a fully divine being but a man in transition, clinging to humanity even as warp energies infiltrated his essence. I witnessed through Valdor's eyes the Emperor still recognizably human, the corruption, if such it was, limited to a faint golden glow surrounding him, a shimmer of not quite reality that hinted at the transformation to come. I stood with Diocletian 3,000 years later, observing an emperor far more divided, the human form still dominant but now sharing space with something other. Not corrupted, not chaotic, but purposefully altered, adapting to an existence straddling realities. Through each successive bearer, I witnessed the progression, the human form gradually ceding territory to the immaterial aspect, the division becoming more pronounced, but also something unexpected. The immaterial aspects becoming more structured, more intentional in their appearance, less random mutation and more deliberate evolution. And through each bearer's mind, I experienced not just what they saw, but what they concluded. Their interpretations, their fears, their hopes. Some viewed the transformation as humanity's salvation, the Emperor becoming what mankind needed to survive in a hostile universe. Others feared it marked the ultimate corruption, the slow victory of chaos through subtler means than open conquest. Most reserved judgment, content to observe and record, leaving conclusions to those who would witness the transformation's completion. Hours or days passed, subjective time meaningless within the scryer cogitator's interface. When I finally emerged, gasping and disoriented, I found myself on my knees before the pedestal, the other truth-bearers and Drygo watching with expressions that mingled concern and understanding. "Now you comprehend," said Diocletian, helping me to my feet. "Not just your own witnessing, but the full pattern." I nodded, unable to speak immediately. The experience had been overwhelming, not just in sensory terms, but conceptually. To witness the slow transformation of the Emperor across 10,000 years, to see the pattern from its inception to its current state, was to understand its trajectory in ways impossible from a single observation. "It is not corruption," I said finally, finding my voice. "Not as we understand the term. It is deliberate, controlled. The Emperor is not being changed against his will, but is directing the change, shaping it toward some purpose we can only glimpse." Drygo nodded within his massive helm. "That has been the conclusion of the Grey Knights for millennia. Whatever the Emperor becomes, it is by his design, not by chaos's victory. But that does not make the transformation less dangerous, nor its outcome less uncertain." "The final phase," I said, the pattern now clear in my mind. "If the progression continues as it has, the division between material and immaterial aspects will collapse within a century. The two halves will merge into a single being, neither fully physical nor fully warp-born." "A god in truth," said Diocletian. "But what kind of god? That remains the question without answer." Drygo turned to a hidden alcove and retrieved a small object wrapped in cloth of gold. "For 10,000 years, we have safeguarded this. The Emperor's final instruction, to be opened by the 10th bearer upon completion of their witnessing." He held out the object, surprisingly small given its apparent significance. With hands that trembled slightly despite my custodian training, I unwrapped the cloth, a data crystal. Ancient technology, its surface etched with symbols that predated the Imperium itself. I recognized them from historical records of the Unification Wars. The Emperor's personal cipher, used before he had adopted the Imperial Aquila as his symbol. "It has never been accessed," said Drygo. "None possess the authority." "Nor I protested. "I am merely the 10th bearer, not the Emperor himself." "The crystal is keyed to activate only for the 10th bearer," explained Diocletian. "It contains the Emperor's contingency instructions, his guidance for the great change." I held the crystal, feeling its weight both physical and metaphysical. The final word of a being in transition between humanity and godhood, the last fully human thoughts of the master of mankind before his transformation progressed beyond recall. "How do I access it?" I asked. Drygo gestured to a reader set into the wall beside the Scrya Cogitator. "It is prepared." With reverence bordering on religious, despite my newfound understanding of the Emperor's true nature, I placed the crystal into the reader. The device hummed to life, projecting not words or images but a direct mental impression. The Emperor's mind touching mine across 10 millennia, not the divided being I had witnessed beneath the palace, not the god thing of imperial faith, the man, the human being who had unified terror and led humanity to the stars. His mental voice was strong, clear, undiminished by time or transformation. Bearer of the 10th witnessing. "You observe me now in my transitional form, divided between what I was and what I am becoming. Know that this division is necessary. The path to transcendence requires understanding of both material and immaterial realities. I cannot guide humanity by remaining purely physical, nor can I protect it by becoming purely warp entity." The mental voice paused, as if gathering thoughts. Even in this recording, the Emperor's mind was overwhelming in its complexity and power. "What you have witnessed is not corruption but evolution, the necessary adaptation of humanity's guardian to threats that exist beyond physical reality. The ruinous powers corrupt because they reflect humanity's darkest aspects, given form and consciousness within the warp. I seek a different path, the elevation of humanity's noblest aspects into a form that can oppose chaos on its own terms." Images accompanied the words. The Emperor's plan, unfolding across millennia, the deliberate sacrifice of his physical form, not in defeat, but as calculated strategy. The Golden Throne, not merely life support, but chrysalis. The faith of quadrillions of humans, not wasted energy, but carefully channeled power, directed towards specific transformation, rather than random godhood. When the great change completes, I will emerge neither human nor god as commonly understood, a being of both realms, capable of acting in both simultaneously. Humanity's first truly evolved form, the template for what the species must become if it is to survive the predations of both physical and metaphysical enemies. More images. A future where humanity evolved along similar lines, not corrupted by chaos but transcending the limitations that made chaos possible. Beings of both matter and energy, body and soul in perfect harmony rather than eternal conflict. But this future is not assured. My transformation could fail. The balance could collapse toward corruption rather than transcendence. The power I have accumulated through human faith could dissipate uselessly into the warp. Or worse, be captured by the ruinous powers and turned against those it was meant to protect. The mental voice grew more urgent, more focused. "This is why you exist, 10th bearer. You and those you will select and prepare. The great change approaches its culmination. When it occurs, humanity must be ready. Those who lead must understand what is happening. They must not respond with fear or rejection, but with acceptance and adaptation. The Imperium must evolve alongside its master, or both will perish in the coming storm." Final instructions followed. Names and locations. Individuals throughout the Imperium who had been subtly prepared by previous bearers, others who would be receptive to the truth by disposition or circumstance. A timeline for revelation, carefully calculated to coincide with the final phases of the Emperor's transformation. 108 years, the voice concluded. That is what remains before the chrysalis opens. Use this time wisely, bearer, for what emerges when the Golden Throne fails will determine humanity's fate for eternity to come. The projection ended, the crystal going dark in the reader. I stood motionless, my mind struggling to process what I had received, not just information but purpose. Clearer and more defined than anything I had known in 10,000 years of custodian service, the Emperor was not dead. Not a corpse sustained by machinery and faith, not a helpless victim of the arch-traitor's final blow. He was transforming, evolving, becoming something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. And he had planned for this moment, this cusp of change, since the day of his interment. "Now you understand," said Diocletian, observing my expression, "why the truth-bearers exist. Why faith alone cannot sustain humanity through what comes next." I nodded, unable to form words adequate to the revelation I had received. The sheer scale of the Emperor's design, stretching across 10 millennia, calculating each step in a transformation that would culminate in something neither human faith nor human science had prepared for. "The question remains," said Drygo, his voice solemn even through his helm's vox emitters. "Is this truly humanity's salvation? Or has the Emperor, in his long isolation, created a justification for what is, in the end, surrender to the same forces he once opposed? Not even the Grey Knights can answer this with certainty." "Perhaps certainty is not required," I replied, finding my voice at last. "Perhaps what matters is not the endpoint, but the journey. The Emperor evolves, so must humanity, so must the Imperium. And that," said Diocletian with something approaching satisfaction, "is why you were chosen, Atheon. You understand that truth is rarely comfortable but always necessary." Drygo gestured toward the chamber's exit. "You have much to discuss with your fellow bearers. A strategy to formulate. I will return in 3 days to hear your planned course of action." With that, he departed, leaving the 5 truth-bearers alone in the ancient chamber. We gathered around the now dormant Scryer Cogitator, each lost in contemplation of what had been revealed. 108 years, said the woman, breaking the silence. Barely a heartbeat in imperial timescales. "But enough," said the Ancient One, "if we act with purpose and clarity." Diocletian looked to me. "You have received the Emperor's final instructions, Atheon. You hold the names, the timeline. As the 10th bearer, the completion of the cycle, leadership of our order falls to you. What would you have us do?" I felt the weight of that responsibility settle upon me, heavier than my custodian armor had ever been. The fate of the Imperium, perhaps of humanity itself, resting on decisions I would make in the coming decades. "We divide the task," I said, the plan forming even as I spoke. "Each bearer takes responsibility for specific sectors and individuals. We coordinate our revelations, ensuring the truth spreads to those who need it most urgently first, then outward in concentric circles of understanding." I turned to Diocletian. "You have served longest. Your insight into the previous bearer's work is invaluable. You will remain here on Titan, maintaining our connection to the Grey Knights and coordinating our efforts across the Imperium." He nodded, accepting the assignment without question. "The rest of us disperse," I continued, "one to the Inquisition, one to the Adeptus Mechanicus, one to the Imperial Guard High Command. I will take responsibility for the Space Marine chapters and the Adeptus Administratum. We select our successors from among those we identify as most receptive to the truth, not custodians this time. The pattern changes with the 10th witnessing. Now any who can bear the truth may serve as its carriers." The other bearers nodded, seeing the logic in this approach. The time for secretive preservation had passed. Now was the time for careful dissemination. "And the message?" asked the woman. "What truth do we reveal, and in what measure?" I considered her question carefully. The full truth of the Emperor's transformation would break most minds, even those prepared to receive it. We would need gradations of revelation, tailored to each recipient's capacity for understanding. "We begin with the Emperor's purpose, not his form," I decided. The idea that his apparent death was a strategic withdrawal, a necessary phase in humanity's protection. We present the Golden Throne not as life support but as chrysalis. We speak of emergence rather than corruption, of transcendence rather than damnation. And for those ready for deeper truth, asked the Ancient One, we reveal the dual nature, the balance between material and immaterial. We explain that what the Imperium worships is neither the man who once lived nor the god they imagine, but something in transition between states. Something becoming rather than something that is. Diocletian nodded approval. And the end point? The great change itself? What do we tell them awaits humanity when the Golden Throne finally fails? I recalled the mental images the Emperor had shared. The vision of humanity evolved beyond its current limitations, neither corrupted by chaos nor enslaved by physical constraints. Something new, something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. We tell them that humanity stands at the cusp of its next evolution, I said. That what the Emperor becomes, humanity may follow. Not through corruption or mutation, but through transcendence of the barriers between material and immaterial. The unification of body and soul, matter and energy, into something that can face the galaxy's horrors on equal terms. They will call it heresy, warned the woman. Even those most open to new understanding will struggle with such concepts. Then we must make them see beyond such limited categories as orthodoxy and heresy, I replied. The Emperor himself transcends such distinctions. So must those who would lead humanity through the great change. We continued our discussion through the ship's night cycle, refining the strategy, allocating specific targets, establishing protocols for communication and coordination. By the time Drygo returned 3 days later, we had formulated a comprehensive plan for the dissemination of truth throughout the highest echelons of the Imperium. The Supreme Grand Master listened in silence as I outlined our approach. When I finished, he removed his helm for the first time, revealing a face lined with experience yet undiminished in its intensity. You understand that not all will accept this truth, he said. Some will view it as the ultimate heresy. They will oppose you with every resource at their disposal. We expect resistance, I acknowledged. From the ecclesiarchy most fiercely, but also from conservative elements within the Inquisition and certain Space Marine chapters. We have identified those most likely to reject the truth and planned accordingly. Planned how? Asked Drygo, his eyes narrowing slightly. The Grey Knights cannot condone violence against loyal servants of the Imperium, no matter how misguided their understanding. Not violence, I assured him. Isolation. Containment. We will ensure that those who cannot accept the truth are gradually moved to positions where they cannot obstruct the necessary preparations. Their faith in the Emperor as God has served humanity for millennia. We do not denigrate it. But it cannot be allowed to prevent humanity's adaptation to what comes next. Drygo considered this for long moments before nodding. The Grey Knights will maintain neutrality in this matter, as we have for 10,000 years. We fight the external enemies of mankind, not its internal divisions. But we will continue to provide sanctuary for the truth-bearers and safeguard the knowledge you have accumulated. That is all we ask, I said. That and your discretion as we begin our work. You have both, affirmed Drygo. Now, I believe your ship is prepared for departure. The journey ahead is long, both in distance and in purpose. We left Titan the following day, the whisper of truth once more slipping through the warp toward the first of many destinations. Our paths would diverge at the Mandeville point of the Sol system, each bearer setting course for their assigned sector of the Imperium. I would not see my fellow bearers again for decades, if ever. Our work would continue separately but in concert, guided by the Emperor's final instructions and our shared understanding of the great change to come. As I stood on the observation deck, watching Saturn dwindle behind us, I reflected on the transformation I had undergone, from custodian to truth-bearer, from guardian of a half-understood relic to herald of an incomprehensible evolution. I had lost much: my brotherhood, my certainty, my place in the rigid hierarchy of the Imperium. But I had gained something greater: purpose, understanding, the privilege of helping shape humanity's response to the most significant event in its history since the Emperor's ascension to the Golden Throne. I touched the twisted aquila pinned inside my robe, feeling its weight against my chest. No longer the burden it had seemed when Valoris first presented it. Now a reminder of the truth I carried and the responsibility I had accepted. The Golden Throne bleeds, the God Thing stirs, the Imperium evolves. And I, Atheon, once shield captain of the Adeptus Custodes, now truth-bearer, will help guide humanity through the storm to come. Not with faith, not with lies, but with truth. Terrible and wondrous, devastating and uplifting, the truth of the Emperor's true form and humanity's ultimate destiny. 108 years until the Great Change. The work begins now,